Good morning. Welcome to Masters of Marketing. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Brent Summers, the Director of Marketing at Blink. He's going to be teaching us about the UX Flywheel and how to use UX design to empower your sales team. Brent, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, Ross. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
You're welcome. So Brent, I know you have an awesome presentation queued up for the next 30 minutes. Can you in 30 seconds just describe what people are going to walk away with?
Sure. So the UX Flywheel is a model to use UX methods to power marketing and sales teams. So you're going to learn about a really vivid definition of strategy, what that means in UX terms, and sort of the three traits of a model called the Flywheel that should make your campaigns more effective in the future.
Perfect. I can't wait to learn those three traits and put them into action. Without further ado, the floor is yours, and we'd love to see your presentation.
Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. Nice to sort of pseudo meet you. I've got about 30 minutes of material, give or take, and some time for questions at the end. I think you can send them through as they come your way, and we'll make space for them. So Ross mentioned, my name is Brent Summers. I'm the Director of Marketing at Blink. You've got my contact information there, so this can be the start of a conversation. Hopefully there's some things that raise questions for you. I'm happy to answer those now or later. This is the cutest dog in the world. His name is Midas. You can follow him on Instagram. He's Midas the Doodle. That's mine. So I mentioned I work at Blink. This is the company I work for. These are some of the clients we work with. I won't go into detail here, but suffice to say that the UX strategy can help you improve existing experiences that are going to ship in the next 1 to 6 months. And we've done that for companies like Nike and Oculus and Starbucks. And UX can also help you with big long-term strategic initiatives. And that's the kind of work we do for USAA, NASA, and Amazon. And we'll come back to that, to some case studies later on. The UX Flywheel is the name of the presentation, and the tagline there, how UX strategy enables effective marketing teams. I'm a little bit biased as a marketer who works in the UX industry, so I buy this stuff pretty easily. Yeah, I think most everyone on the team here and the presentation, I'm sure, is a marketer, maybe with different degrees of understanding about UX. I'm not a hardcore UXer. I sort of work like UX and design adjacent. And this is my spin on UX in a way that other marketers tend to understand and get behind. So I'm going to first share the model and how it's different than a traditional marketing funnel. I'll explain the components of the model and really help you understand the difference between user research and traditional market research. And then I've got a case study that should help tie it all together. Before I dive into the details, I wanted to share the inspiration for the talk. I follow a guy named Dave Gerhardt. He no longer works at Drift. He works now as the CMO of a company called Privy. But last year, he put out this post on LinkedIn, and it really got me thinking. So it says, how do you effectively market in a world where 99% of people don't want to be marketed to, 99% of people only read headlines or tweets, and 99% of people are skeptical of sales, plus all the fake news stuff, which is not really the point. So Dave's got a really big LinkedIn following, a strong personal brand. I mean, you can see, right, there's like 123 hearts and 82 comments already. And as I was watching the comments come in, everybody was mentioning things like 1,000,001 different software tools and videos or webinars as an opportunity to really engage with the audience. Live chat and messaging are like disruptive technologies that are creating new channels. Customer data and personalization and direct mail even worked for some people. And one person even mentioned influencer marketing. And I thought all those comments and ideas were really cool, but it was a lot of tactics. And so what was missing for me in this conversation thread was a mention of strategy. And so I thought we should start by talking about the definition of strategy. So here's what the old Google told me. I think they referenced Oxford English Dictionary. So it's a plan of action or policy designed to achieve a major or overall aim. So let's break that down, right? Strategy is a plan of action. So it's basically a series of tactics. And that's why sometimes people will get confused or easily transition to sort of a tactical thought or tactical frame of mind. But strategy is a plan of action or policy And it's designed to achieve something, and not just anything, but a really big, hairy, audacious goal, right? Plan of action designed to achieve a major goal. So here's a really clear picture of an audacious goal. This is the rumble and the jungle, and that's Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. And this is a really vivid example of strategy. If you're not familiar with this fight, um, George Foreman was favored to win 4-1 because he was so much more powerful than Muhammad Ali. They called him Big George. He had already successfully defended his title twice before this fight. So Ali was going into this as an underdog, and he knew that he wasn't going to be able to beat George Foreman on power alone. He was going to have to outsmart him with a strategic plan. So the first thing he did is the same stuff that we do in UX, or you hopefully do in marketing, which is look at evidence. Look at the people that you're going to be interacting with and understand how they think and act. So Ali watched hours and hours of footage, and it was clear what George Foreman's sort of boxing style was. One of the things he did was paw at his opponents to draw them open so that he could land punches in the gut. He also was a very aggressive fighter. He usually won his fights in fewer than 5 rounds, sometimes even less than 4. So Ali looked at all that data and he developed a 3-part strategy, and you're probably going to know some of this. So the dodge and counter is one of Ali's most notable strategies as a boxer. You know the adage, right? Fly like a butterfly, sting like a bee. And this was that in practice. He would sort of dodge to the left and miss a jab, and then hit George Foreman with an uppercut. So that's the first element of the 3-part strategy. The second was psyching him out. So everybody's seen these like boxer hugs, right? Where you break the guy's momentum. What's really wild in rewatching this fight is that Muhammad Ali was screaming in George Foreman's ear. He was saying, "Is that all you got? Come on, George, bring it to me." And so he's keeping the intensity of this match high, even when you're breaking the momentum. And the other thing that he did in preparation for this match was he just got beat up on. He knew that George Foreman was really strong and a powerful boxer, and so he would, just have like defensive bouts in preparation for this, and that led to this third and final tactic in his strategic plan. And this is probably the one that the rope-a-dope. So the rope-a-dope is basically using laws of physics to absorb the power from George Foreman and transfer that energy into the ring, onto the ropes. And this allowed Muhammad Ali to really endure so that he could come alive in round 6 and eventually knock George Foreman out in round 8. So that's strategy, right? This big, hairy, audacious goal and a series of decisions, micro decisions, tactics that are going to get you there. All right. The UX Flywheel is also a form of strategy. It's a point of view on how you're going to achieve an outcome. And in the case of marketing, that outcome is, qualified leads or opportunities. So UX Flywheel has 3 parts. I told you that. And the strategy model is similar to boxing rounds in that it allows for iterations, because I think you have that opportunity as a marketer, whether it's in between campaigns or multiple consecutive touch points, or it's a relationship with an existing customer that you're trying to nurture and grow into another account tier or prevent from churning out. You have multiple opportunities to delight, interact with, and learn from your customers. And the flywheel is, a reference point for how you can take those conversations. So this is a restaurant that I go to all the time here in San Diego. I really miss it right now. It's called the Turf Club. I work a lot with SaaS companies, and SaaS to me is very similar to a restaurant. in that it can be easy to get somebody to come in and try you for the first time, right? SaaS oftentimes gives their services away for free. But for you to create sort of a rabid fan base and advocates, you've got to have something that's unique and differentiated. And that's what the Turf Club offers for me. It's this like 1950s dive bar that's got one grill in the center. And it's part of our cultural tradition at Blink San Diego. But I digress. The point is like learning what somebody likes and giving it to them, even if it's, maybe not the best looking thing in town. So the marketing the old way, right, works in this funnel, right? You probably are familiar with this old framework, the AIDA framework: awareness, interest, desire, and action. It's been reinterpreted a bunch of times over the years, perhaps most famously in the inbound marketing model by HubSpot. So the UX Flywheel is an adaptation of those, but instead of it being a linear flow, it's an iterative process. It's inspired by other flywheels. I'm a CrossFitter, so the rowing machine that I use, the potter's wheel, even the crank on your bike is a form of flywheel. And what that does is provide continuous power output in systems where the energy source is not continuous. What I mean by that is, in marketing, we have to do lots of things, right? We need to build brand awareness. We need to generate demand. We need to garner market intelligence. And the flywheel is a mechanism, if you will, for doing each of those things despite limited resources. So the flywheel, this is perhaps unsurprising, revolves around the customer or the user, and not just who they are or what their demographics look like, but it's about having a deep understanding of your customer, what makes them tick. So user research, unlike traditional market research, really helps you understand people's motivations, their self-identity, their attitudes, and the context of use. Are they in a special environment, a comfy chair, outdoors when they're using this? So I want to help you understand market research, which is demographics and statistics, and cross-reference that to user research, which is about attitudes and motivations. So imagine, if you will, two customers that are both born in 1948. They're both male and they're from Great Britain. So yeah, they're white. They're married, they're successful, and they're really wealthy. Like, they live in castles and they both happen to have 2 children. They like dogs and they love the Alps. These two guys are a lot alike, right, in terms of demographics. Well, the first one I was describing is our dear friend Prince Charles, and the other is Ozzy Osbourne, right? So these guys could not be more different in terms of their attitude, the context of use, the things they value, but demographically they look very similar. And that's why user research, or a UX-focused approach to marketing, can really be quite powerful. Statistical descriptions are important, but user research helps you understand habits, culture, social context. And without that, it's really difficult to achieve a compelling value proposition that is intrinsically motivating. So the UX Flywheel can help you with that. First ingredient there is desire. Desire is really difficult to manufacture. I'm married now, but I remember how frustrated I was with a guy that I was trying to date. We'll call him Eric. Eric was tall and handsome, and he was a doctor. And my mom really would have been proud of me for having landed a doctor, right? But despite my best efforts, I just didn't like him. And that's what desire is. It's this intrinsic motivation. You might be familiar with this catchphrase that making things people want is better than making people want things. And that's what understanding desire is about. That's why it's such a key and the first ingredient in the flywheel. Trust is the second ingredient, and you earn trust through consistency of your behavior, matching the expectations that you set. Influencer marketing is one of the best examples of trust. These creators promise that they're going to create content, and they do. And that establishes trust. That's really, really simple. But earning people's trust, it takes time. It happens through, like I said, consistency of behavior matching expectations. You can use UX methods to understand what people want, right? That's the desire piece, and how to get them to trust you. Why do they prefer one thing over another? That's going to help you with better and more effective messaging. And it's important that you get that messaging right from the beginning, because you've only got a limited amount of time to build trust at the beginning of your relationship. There's a report that says that in B2B SaaS, you have 7 touch points before someone's really going to be in a buying cycle, and then they fall out of that buying cycle within just a few touch points. So you've got this kind of narrow window to understand what people want and to earn their trust. So UX research can help you understand the market generally and what they want and how they will respond to a message, so that when you're bringing that to the market en masse, whether through advertising or webinars or any other kind of medium, you know that the message is going to resonate. And the final component of the flywheel is action. My buddy Dave pointed out in that LinkedIn post that 99% of people only read headlines, right? Well, if you're doing content marketing, you need people to take action at the bottom of the blog post. And so all of this is for naught if you can't drive people to action. And one of the best ways that you can do that is through language, and that's whether it's written language like copy or a design language. This language really influences behavior. You can use quantitative methods like data science and analytics to understand what actions people take. And you can use qualitative methods like contextual interview to understand why people take those actions. So again, in like using the flywheel as a way of understanding your customers, you've got these different dimensions that you want to study, right? What they want, the desire piece, how to get them to trust you, and what motivates them to action. And you've got various methods: interviews, market research, surveys, A/B testing, card sorting, that can help you understand these different dimensions and put together a recipe that's going to work. On the content side of things, we at Blink tend to use Cialdini's 6 principles of persuasion as a way of making sure that things like landing pages or product detail pages hit on these different components. We want to make sure that we say what the product does clearly, and that there's solid proof points like social proof. That's a measure of influence. We also look for things like reciprocity and authority and scarcity from Cialdini's book to really help amplify our results. So those are the 3 ingredients: desire, trust, and action. And that's the UX flywheel. I've got a case study now, but I can pause for questions if any have come in.
There's a lot of questions. So the first question is just, you say that you should start every marketing campaign with UX. How much time does that add to the actual creation of the UX, the marketing campaign? If you're a startup and you're just trying to get something out there and see what people like, does UX double the length of making that marketing campaign, or what are your expectations?
Sure. I'll stop the share for right now. Yeah, that's a really excellent question. I think in a best case scenario, you're sort of always on with learning about your customers. That's really important in the startup world. And so I wouldn't think about this as being an extra layer, but instead a framework for using what you hopefully are already doing. As it relates specifically to a campaign, it's very elastic. You know, you can do some guerrilla testing. You can call me or Ross and get our opinion on something. Or you can learn on the fly while a campaign is running. So there's definitely different ways to limit the upfront time. If you were going to call Blink and have us do a round of formal research on a campaign, that whole process, including recruiting, doing the research and reporting out, is like 4 to 5 weeks.
Gotcha. That's a great answer. That leads into my second question. You said learning on the fly while you're running a campaign. You say a lot about understanding what your users want so that you can start the campaign. Do you do that from scratch? You were saying don't build something people you think people want, but something people actually want. So do you go out and find who you think will want your product and interview them? Or do you set up a top of funnel marketing campaign, find some people that flow through the first couple of steps, and then after you've kind of determined that high level they want the idea you're selling, do you research those people?
Yeah. So I think, again, that sort of depends on the context that you want to use UX, whether that's around product development, which is something we did for Domino's when we helped them with the pizza tracker in 2008, or a campaign that you're running against an already successful program like we did with Amazon Charts with Year in Books in 2017. There are different approaches for different scenarios, and there's not a single rule of thumb. I do think that UX can help you innovate discreetly and safely and build confidence against an idea that you want to invest in. And so we see that happen a lot with entrepreneurs or startups inside of larger companies where they have a conceptual idea, and sometimes we are doing hardware prototype testing with like a sponge that represents the form factor of a phone that a famous Seattle retailer might bring to market.
Gotcha. Interesting. um, so going into like you kind of hit the nail on even the next question. You're just leading into these, but so you said like the sponge represents the form factor. You had talked about going to a restaurant where they had one really unique thing in the middle of the restaurant, the grill, but it seems like you kind of found that restaurant with that grill. How, with so many unique things that you can offer your customers, do you just pull them out of thin air and test what you think's interesting, like the form factor of that sponge or a grill or whatever you think might be never been tried before, but you think will work?
Yeah. So that is really a matter of like um, intellectual debate ahead of starting the research, is figuring out what it is that you want to learn. And then we create sort of a contrived environment, right, in order to learn about those things. I'll give you an example, though, to help you understand value proposition. We've done a bunch of work with Moen. We helped them with this product called the U by Moen, which is a smart shower. That was met with critical success at CES. So they came back to us the next year and said, we want to take the success of U and we want to build a smart faucet. And so we know we have the technology, but we're not totally sure what the value proposition is. And so we thought it might be water at a specific temperature to fill a baby bottle, or it might be water at a specific temperature for at a certain amount for a recipe. So we did a method called Wizard of Oz testing where we had a water faucet that we controlled in another room and an Alexa that, mimicked the idea of a voice activated faucet. And while those use cases were all true, we learned two things that were really important. And you can see this in the live smart faucet. Number one, we learned that people needed a gesture control. They would not rely exclusively on voice as the way to turn the faucet on or off. They like intuitively expected there to be the ability to like wave their hand to turn the water off, not just tell Alexa. The value proposition thing, which is your question, people repeatedly talked about chicken hands and how convenient this would be while they had chicken hands. And that's the phrase they used, chicken hands. They didn't say, I would really value a sanitation message, right? They're like visceral image that they conjured up in this contrived environment was chicken hands. And so that's the value proposition that Moen's going to is attached, right? As the first thing they mention when promoting this faucet with multiple capabilities.
Gotcha. So it's knowing what your technology is, interviewing the people you think will use your technology to figure out what their visceral reaction is, and then building the technology to suit that purpose because they've told you what they want the marketing campaign to be exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Um, so the last question we have for right now is, I've worked in UX before, and this is always a huge question that's really hard to answer. But how do you determine you might go into this, but how do you determine the ROI of all of this? The campaign that you make with the UX methods versus a campaign you don't make with the UX methods, and how much better it becomes.
Yeah, I think that's, it's really difficult to quantify that kind of stuff unless you're going to have a control group that is like, this was what our original idea was for the campaign, and we're going to run that sort of like brand forward idea, right? Opinion forward idea. I shouldn't say brand forward, opinion forward idea. One of our tenets is evidence over opinions. And so the idea with that is, as a marketing team, you're close to your customers, and you probably have a really good idea for directionally where to point them to have a successful campaign. But an additional nuanced understanding could help you perhaps create a micro audience that's like, all right, the people who work in tech in San Francisco respond to this kind of parlance, right? Like, we're going to phrase it this way. And people who are from Europe or from the East Coast maybe are going to value these logos over those logos, or they're not going to call it growth marketing. They tend to call it digital marketing. So that's
Gotcha.
that's what we try to use UX to understand. Sometimes it's very directional, and then a lot of times it's nuance.
Gotcha. Do you have an example of that where you did a micro audience as part of a larger campaign and you saw or learned something that you didn't expect?
Yeah. So the case study that I have will cue that up pretty well. It's more around use case than micro audience, but it does definitely talk about the same product being positioned for different people.
Gotcha. Okay. That's all we have right now. So I'll let you jump back in.
Cool. And the ROI of all that is difficult to manage, to measure. That was the original question. I think there's definitely some amount of trust involved that this is making the results better, but hopefully the results speak for themselves regardless.
For sure.
So yeah, we worked with a company called Sumo Logic. This was really exciting for me. I love B2B SaaS, and I've worked with New Relic and Segment and Elasticsearch. So Sumo Logic is a kind of company that I get, and was really excited to help them really rebrand in preparation for another round of investment and an eventual IPO. The goal of this redesign was obviously to drive more leads, but they wanted to create $1 billion brand and sort of accelerate growth, as so many people do, but also like focus on enterprise companies. So, okay, a little bit about Sumo Logic. They are a log analytics solution, and their product helps companies collaborate, develop, operate, and secure cloud applications. They've been used by Pokemon Go, Pitney Bowes, Acquia, Airbnb. I can see Major League Baseball and Samsung on there too. And this was like a full stack redesign. It took us however many months that is, 5 months. So this is like a high level view of the workshop and an interpretation of the UX flywheel applied here to this schedule. So over the course of this project, we did 3 rounds of user research. We did foundational research up front with their stakeholders and interviewed a bunch of customers to create personas. And that was mostly about, what do people want? Why do they want it? The first round of testing I've labeled as the trust round, and this was bringing concepts for a website to a group of users. I don't know, something like 20 users, maybe fewer than that. And we A/B tested essentially different value propositions, executing the pages different ways. One was a photographic heavy design. One was a more like abstract illustration design. And then the final round of testing action was really about confirming that people could successfully find all of the proof points and product documentation they needed in order to start a trial. So we had a lot that we wanted to learn, but we learned it incrementally throughout that process. This is us at the workshop. That was what, 4 weeks in, 5 weeks into the project. I was growing out a mullet at the time. You can see that in the front of the room. And you can see Susie back there. Susie was one of our 3 personas. So here we used a kind of a running metaphor for describing the mental models for the persona. There was the all-out sprinter, the mindful runner, and the slow jogger. And so the all-out sprinter was somebody who was technically quite capable, right? Like an individual contributor, software engineer, or security analyst that would be able to click sign up and start a trial right away. The slow jogger, on the other hand, is probably an executive, and they're going to take an in-depth look at the product stack, read the support documentation, and probably deploy a resource to do a trial. And so it was important to understand that those people might all need the same solution, but the way that they shop is different. And that's why we needed such a deep information architecture, right? Different types of content for different people at different stages of the journey. This is, part of the discovery phase. This is like the working whiteboard that went into that fancy presentation, the strengths and weaknesses in their current application, a whole bunch of like terminology stuff. Crispness of language became really, really important with Sumo Logic. Again, they're a log analytics platform. So log analytics is also called machine data, but machine data is not machine learning. But when people are scanning a website and they see machine data platform, their like impulse is to read that as machine learning, which Sumo Logic has machine learning capabilities, but that wasn't exactly the core value proposition. So saying log analytics was something that we learned to be quite useful at making sure they could not sound redundant when talking about their machine learning capabilities later on. Whew, that was a mouthful. So this is an example of an exercise we did. It's a Mad Lib exercise from the Osterwilde Value Proposition Design book. I really like this book. And this was us gathering inputs and saying, what are the messages that you want us to put in front of people? Like, we know what's on your website today, but how would you reinterpret that? And so this was the fodder for a round of testing. Another thing that we did for Sumo Logic, and this is very common, is we look at writing quality through grade level suitability. So we put this stuff into reading analyzers that give us a score. The one we happen to like most is the Fleisch-Kincaid grade level. And it's easy to think about the fact that these are software engineers, or we work in Silicon Valley, and it's okay to speak at a 10th grade level for everybody because they all have college degrees. But when you look at companies like Elasticsearch and New Relic, who have managed to move their grade level suitability down into the 6th grade level, that's really taking a complex subject matter and making it really easy and simple to understand. Stripe does a lot of things well. By this score, they're not doing great. But I wanted to point out that Splunk is a competitor of Sumo Logic, and Datadog is pretty competitive also. So when you're just thinking about how do you edge out the competition, things like semicolons and compound sentences and adverbs that are unnecessary, paying attention to your copy is a really great way of making your message clearer and more persuasive. This is the A/B testing that I talked about. On the right, you can see us live in a observation room while there's a researcher in another room, and we're sort of like solutioning real time. I mentioned the machine data and machine learning confusion earlier. Another thing that we learned in this round of testing was that participants were constantly trying to interpret an explicit meaning from all of the visual elements on the page, so that anytime that we were showing a chart like the one on the right, it needed to really tell a sensible story that was easy to infer. So we could have all the design fun we wanted to around the specific visualization methods and details, but the data story that it was implying needed to really support the value proposition that was being stated. This is sort of how the design system looked all together. It's a series of blog posts and white papers and case studies and pricing pages, all of that kind of stuff. So, it's a really large website, something well over 1,000 pages. And one of the things that we did, this gets back to that question, Ross, is we understood that there were different use cases that each needed a value proposition. So people who worked in operations, they wanted to monitor in real time. People in security analytics wanted to act on threats, and people in business analytics wanted to make smarter decisions. So the value proposition is monitor, act on threats, and make decisions. And the differentiator in each of those is real time, instantly, and decisions. So this lockup actually became so valuable to Sumo Logic that this became the backdrop for their field marketing booth. So we did this cool thing with motion design on the website to get people to stop and read it. And they would sort of, then self-select which use case was best for them, so we could continue the story in their own vernacular that was appropriate to their use case. But the design and the message here was so effective and popular at Sumo Logic, like I said, that they sort of turned this into the backdrop for their booth. So yeah, that's the flywheel. And that's me. I'm happy to take some more questions, and you please do link up.
Sure. Thank you, Brent. This is awesome. That was a great example of the entire process of learning from your customers and putting it into action. And those 3 campaigns, or those 3 outputs, seem to be like a great culmination of what you've learned, that not only could be in that booth, but could go out as 3 separate campaigns to those direct audiences if you're a smaller startup. Mm-hmm. The questions that have come in are mostly around being a smaller startup. So a lot of our audience is people that work at companies from 50 to 200 employees. They might not be ready to hire a UX firm yet, but they want to try out using these same strategies so that they can do it in a small campaign, get some buy-in, show that it works. What you just showed looks like a team of 3 or 4 people working over 5 months. You'd mentioned a book. Do you have resources like that book or other courses that you would recommend where you can kind of follow the process maybe in a week or 2 to learn the process and try it at your company before you expand your investment?
Totally. So the book I mentioned here, this was about value proposition design. And there are just multiple exercises in here, which is all about understanding your customer and figuring out an offer you might make to them. It focuses mostly on, I would say it's intended for people who are still at a malleable state of their product offering. So a smaller company or a startup that's not quite at the scale up phase, might still have some malleability in what they offer. There's a book by a guy named Jeff Gotthelf called Lean UX. And that's like the UX version of Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup. Eric is a former client of mine. I worked with him on the launch of both of his books. And so if you're following lean practices, Jeff Gotthelf's book, Lean UX, is a really great way to think about UX in relatable terms. But at the end of the day, it's about talking to people who are your customer or represent your customer and making the time to speak with them. There are plenty of books that will teach you about moderation and how to not ask leading questions. That is a practice. The harder and more important part is figuring out what it is that you need to learn and how to structure conversations such that you learn that. And people go to school for, PhDs for that kind of stuff. Any kind of book on UX strategy or UX research is going to be an input. And the best way to learn is probably by doing.
For sure. So I worked at Cooper previously. It's a UX design consultancy. And I think the best thing I ever did was they just had a short Udemy course and I went through it with a project, and it went through every single step of, interviewing some people, writing down what your goals are, writing out these non-leading questions, and maybe took me 2 weeks to go through, and I found out that the product that I was so excited to make, nobody wanted. So yeah, there's definitely resources out there to get started, and those are great examples of them. Thank you. Follow-up question, there's like bigger books, like you said people go to college for stuff like this. There's 700-page books like About Face or Design for the Digital Age, which will teach you tons of stuff. Is it necessary to know all of that, or are the books that you're talking about teaching you just the high level that you need to know and that suffices?
I mean, I think that's about like a depth of understanding, right? I think that as marketers, we are inclined to want to understand and advocate for our customers, and these books help you get closer to them so that your creative energies become more effective. It's not. I don't think it's necessary to read all those books, right? There's more books that I'm gonna continue to read. So I think don't make excuses to delay. Make excuses to get started, even if it's imperfect, because it's reps and sets. That's how you will get better. And I think if you can make the time to talk to customers in any fashion, even if you have missteps along the way, you are probably going to learn things that are going to help you make a better offer, and persuade them more and provide a better product and experience.
That's a great response. Yeah,
Brent,
there's a lot of books you can learn, and a lot of the learning's also just in person. Sounds like Brian has a question. Did you have a question, Brian?
Brent, this has been awesome. This has been like awesome presentation. I whenever I get into like kind of like you're doing a little bit of a product definition, you're like decreasing the state of readability, like really you almost are like doing some like CRO activities in there, which I thought was like really interesting as part of the UX Flywheel. What I like to always ask kind of like in these types of scenarios is what's like the campaign that you ran that was your favorite, or the most unexpected thing that you ran that you thought would work, or even the opposite that you didn't think would work, and then like ended up happening to work, or what was like your most unexpected kind of realization?
Sure.
In any of the campaigns that you worked on?
Yeah, this is fun. So I worked on a website redesign for a woman named Danielle Laporte, and she is an author with a book called The Desire Map, and it's like a spiritual guru kind of book. Super cool stuff. Anyways, she wanted this feature on her website that later became a technique that we used for New Relic on a campaign. And what she wanted was a modal to come over, and she had some like very poetic message, and it said, "Click to unlock." There was no like email required. It was just, she wanted somebody to like commit, take an action on my website before you can like read any of the words. And I was like, this is so counterintuitive. Like, can't do this kind of shit to your users on your website. But so we just agreed to do it on an A/B test, and we found out, lo and behold, that when even accounting for that click, and counterbalancing that, the engagement was further. People went further, they read more on the site. So we're working with New Relic a couple of months later, and we're doing A/B testing on a form, pretty traditional like lead capture form. And we ended up doing 3 or 4 versions of it. There's a blog post about it, but one of the versions, had a value proposition and a click to sign up button that then flipped and revealed the form. And that turned out to be 100%, 118% more performant than the baseline test, which had a form on the page. Pretty much all the same language and like same imagery. That was the big interaction difference.
That's amazing. A lot of my family is in sales, and they talk about this thing called like the yes ladder. And it sounds like it's that in web form. It's like incremental commitment, and just eases the individual or eases the potential customer into a yes.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's awesome.
Nice. I don't have any more questions from the audience, so I'm going to wrap it up with the 3 final questions that I always ask. The first one I think that you've answered in great detail already, but I'll just ask it again in case you have any more resources. But what are the main places you love to go to stay up to date on learning the newest thing that you can apply to your strategies and stay ahead of the curve?
Oh gosh. I think the number one thing I do is I'm pretty obsessive with LinkedIn. So I've got a couple of influencers, mentors that I follow, and when a big thread is going on, I will look at the comments and try to find out who else is adding value to that conversation, so that can expand my universe. Ton of reading and even skimming of books. That's a secret hack of mine, is I'll buy a book and I don't feel like I have to finish it. I can read the chapters that are interesting to me. That's My husband doesn't agree with that philosophy, but I'm constantly looking for new fodder to have a better understanding of the world.
Gotcha. You need to get your husband the 4-hour work week, and then he'll read
Yeah.
that book and he'll agree with your philosophy that, don't finish it if you're not going to get more value. Move on to the next thing. Gotcha. So second, you started with this at the very beginning, but can you just again tell people what the best way to reach out to you is if they want to learn more about this presentation, about your expertise, or get started with Blink?
Sure. So Twitter is probably the best way. I'm at Brent Summers, BrentSummers. You can also find me on LinkedIn. There's a couple of other Brent Summers, including a guy in San Francisco who works in marketing, not the same one. So I work at Blink, and I'm Brent at blinkux.com. If you can email me, that's great too.
Nice. Do you look the same as the guy in San Francisco? Everybody's wondering this question.
We have both. I think he has glasses, but we don't look the same. He's got dark hair. He looks more like you, actually.
Oh, cool. I mean, we don't look that different, so people will get confused. We'll point them in the right direction.
Yeah.
And then just to wrap it up, who do you want to learn from? Who, if you had the opportunity, would you want to do an AMA with so that you could ask anything you want and learn more about marketing?
Oh my gosh. Seth Godin.
And why?
I think his book, The Dip, was like, and permission marketing. Both of those were like things that I discovered very early on in my career. I was working as a business analyst at NASCAR at the time. And, there was stuff about the way that he perceived marketing that I thought we ought to be doing. I was working in technology projects in service to marketing. So I didn't understand marketing at all. But the way he talked about it made it very accessible and inspirational to me, and like drew me into the career that I have today.
Did you have the opportunity to apply the things that he was saying, even in some small amount, in that position when you read his books?
Oh gosh. Sure. I was writing functional requirements and creating the worst wireframes in the world back then.
Yes.
And part of like the ticket purchase was an opt-in. And so that was totally a point of like, how can we be clear about a value proposition here, and make it obvious that somebody has a choice there, and compelling as to why they ought to choose to subscribe.
Got it. Brent, thank you so much for that answer, for all of your other answers, and for your great presentation on the UX Flywheel, how to empower your marketing and sales team with UX. Coming from a UX background, I've seen a lot of presentations where people go through their strategy that they've used with customers. And I actually really liked your presentation because it showed exactly how it leads into the 3 individual marketing campaigns that come out of the things that you learn from your customers, which makes it valuable. And I think that the books that you recommended can really be used by some of the startups and a lot of people watching this show to start using those tactics in their marketing campaigns as well. So thank you so much for coming on Masters of Marketing. Thank you everyone who attended today, and we'll see you Monday on the next episode.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks. See you soon. Bye.